This is the second in what I'm sure is going to be a series of interviews with Jonna Rae Bartges. I'm having a lot of fun, and I think you are too, Jonna Rae. Are you?
Oh, I'm having a ball. You are awesome.
Oh,
You're
well, I was hoping you would say that. No, I didn't know you could say that. This is, I think, it's going to be a really interesting episode, and got it all planned out here. We're going to talk at the first. We're going to talk about the experience that Jonna Rae had as a girl growing up there in Allentown, in a family that really didn't want to hear anything about spiritual stuff or the other side or experiences like the astral projection that she had. She was young. They just kind of didn't poo-poo it, but they're like, that's not real and that sort of thing. So we're going to go into that a little bit and talk about this tremendous number of things that happened to you. But let's get down to it. One of the things was that you had precognition when that you had a dream and you had a precognition, which is, I think, is that you knew something that was going to happen before it happened. Is that correct?
That's right. And I was about,
All right.
I don't know, 7 or 8 at the time. And
Okay. And tell us about it.
okay, sure. In this dream, this gorgeous cat showed up in my vision. She said her name was Tapestry. And instead of just fur around her collar, she had like huge feathers. She was just magnificent. And she said to me, "I've been looking for you." Okay. And the dream itself was beautiful, but I got awake because my dad was calling up the stairs, early in the morning, and he was saying, "Jonna Rae, somebody's down here looking for you." And he used the exact words that she had used in the dream. And I came downstairs, and there's this magnificent cat outside just sitting there staring in the door with this big fur ruff. And I knew her name was Tapestry, and that was my cat. And she freaked out the rest of the family because she was very otherworldly. Like we talked about, the house is built in the 1750s. And so
Right.
a dirt cellar where we had the washing machine and a coal bin and all that stuff. And my mom would be taking clothes down and she would be trying to come back up the stairs. Tapestry would be sitting in the middle of the stairs, just staring at her. A limo servant, sorry, Jonna Rae, to start. Because it was a little bizarre, I guess, but
It happened to you. You knew what was going to happen.
oh Lord,
And
I knew her name. I knew what she was going to look like.
that's
Well,
wild. It's wild. And also, as a student there in Allentown, it's an area that is steeped in history and Revolutionary War history. And the Revolutionary War with the Continental Congress happened in Philadelphia, which, as you said, is quite close to Allentown. And also, so would you tell us a little bit about your feelings as just a young girl when you went to Philadelphia on your field trip and also other field trip there in Allentown?
yeah, I was just totally overwhelmed. I would be, crying. It was so deeply personal to me, seeing where the actual Liberty Bell, where it was displayed. And another interesting karmic thing is during the Revolutionary War, the Liberty Bell was actually smuggled out of Philadelphia and brought to Allentown and hidden in the basement of Old Zion Church so that the British couldn't capture it and melt it down into bullets.
Okay.
And so everything it just felt so deeply personal to me about this. I could kind of be in the energy of it, and it just completely blew me away. And it wasn't until just recently, just a couple of years ago, that I was in a past life regression. Normally, I'm leading them. And so when you're leading them, you kind of don't go into the regression yourself. You're holding the sacred space for the people in it. You're making sure that everybody is on a positive level with it. And so this time I was actually able to let go and go into the past life regression. And I was Thomas Jefferson's mom. And it was so interesting because in the 1700s, women didn't have any kind of a political voice. And I see that I had very strong opinions about liberty and democracy. And so I was kind of pushing my son into going into politics and becoming a writer and all this so that he could express the views that I held very deeply, but I couldn't speak to myself. And when I was done with the regression, I was so fascinated with this information. And being an old newspaper reporter, I had to investigate this. And it turns out Thomas Jefferson's mother's name was Jane Randolph Jefferson, JR. I'm a JR.
Oh my goodness.
She died of she died of an aneurysm. I died of a brain aneurysm, but I came back. And sometimes the historical account said Thomas Jefferson resented her for pushing him into politics and work. So no wonder I felt such a strong connection to everything going on in Philadelphia and everything dealing with the colonial era.
So I take it you probably got on a bus to go to the see the Liberty Bell and to see Carpenter Hall, right?
Yep.
From Allentown.
Yep.
So when you got on the bus, were you feeling anything then, or
no, always. I just, even hearing the stories about the revolution, Disney put out the movie Johnny Tremaine, and I remember watching that and just sobbing hysterically. Johnny Tremaine was an apprentice to Paul Revere, I believe, the Smith, and it was just like I understood everything that was happening. I identified with the people and what they were wearing and what they were eating. Everything was just so vivid for me, and I realize now that I was having very strong past life recall, for having been there before. And also, whenever we go someplace, and especially when something dramatic has happened there, we leave energetic fingerprints, basically. And so, like, if you go into an old church where there have been centuries of prayer, you can feel the energy of that.
You can. I felt it too.
And so me going into, like, Carpenter's Hall with the school field trip and just being there in the energy of my son, Thomas, and Ben Franklin and George Washington, and feeling all these so deeply and personally. And then growing up in a house from that era, the whole thing was sometimes overwhelming, but also it just was so incredibly normal for me. It's like, this is just where I go, what I
understand, because you, as a person, even despite the fact you were a young person, we all have to develop defense mechanisms and survival mechanisms. And you were developing and had developed there the ability to have a very real and natural reaction to this past life, but meanwhile, keep it separate.
Yeah, having to pass for normal, pretty much, and not letting on that I'm having these memories, this recall, these sensations from other times. Not acknowledging that, because it was, I kept getting the message: be normal, don't be weird. Right.
Now, one thing that you and I talked about was that at some point in time in your youth that you started to sing in a language that you don't know.
Yeah, and it wasn't just like singing; it was like opera. And so, like, as a little munchkin, I was just doing that, and I can still do it today. And something else about music is it's a particle in a wave. It has, like, all kinds of physical properties, emotional catalyst, all these different things. When I was, I guess, around 6, I was at a little friend's house down in the finished basement, and her dad was a school psychologist, and he was working in his desk in a different part of the room. She had started taking Montessori violin classes, and so her little violin was sitting there, and I was fascinated with this. And so I walked over and picked up her violin and started to play it. And I don't mean making noise. I mean, I was playing the violin. And her father immediately jumped up from his desk and came running over, and he said, "How long have you been taking lessons?" Because I didn't realize it at the time, but he felt great competition with my parents about
Okay.
And I was so scared by their reaction that I just put the little violin down. And I never learned to read music because of that. It's like I've carried that fear with me. But it was more proof to me, looking, retrospectively, that I have had lifetimes in music, in different countries. And it's making me feel like you really need to learn how to read music now. Because there's something there. But I have played the guitar, I sing, all of that. But but there's just, it goes a lot deeper. I get the message.
Well, yeah, I recently did an interview with a scientist, Jim Matlock, who's very well noted and respected here in the United States and around the world. And he studies the children that have memories of past lives. And a couple of the aspects of that is sometimes children will speak another language. Just briefly, he talked about one girl that grew up and she was able to speak a language, but not the language that the people spoke all around her. And it wasn't until she was 5 years old that she started to speak the language of her family and all the people around her. And I think of how much easier it would have been for her just to go ahead and learn the language everyone else was speaking. But this was so strong in her, this other language, that she just kept saying it. And so that's one incredible thing that you had was this language. And the idea of the music, of being able to play an instrument, again, this is past lives coming through, an ability that you had before that you were able to just express. And certainly, as a young person, having these experiences, I just can't imagine what it was like for you to, you just went up and picked up a violin and just started playing it. And then you went home to your house and couldn't really talk about it, right?
Right.
Say, hey, mom, did you know that I can play the violin? Can we get a violin? Because I can play it.
Exactly. And had I had the courage to do that, or had I felt that my parents would be receptive, I would probably be in a concert hall someplace now, playing violin.
Right.
That's part of what drives me now to teach these classes, to make this, to normalize this type of ability.
Right. You don't want other people to go through what you went through, which was not to be able to connect up with what was there. What is there?
Yeah. No, it was very isolating. And I always was made to feel that I had to be normal because otherwise it was weird. And so I always had to push myself to excel and to really, earn stripes in the real world, because that was the message.
Looking at my note here that when you were in 6th grade, that you had a teacher named Mr. Pfister, Pfister. And could you tell a little bit about that person?
Yeah, that was 5th grade, I believe. And he was
5th grade. Okay.
Yeah. And I always felt ill when I was around him. And when I would look at him, or when I would look at anyone, I could see their features kind of fade out. The eyes might stay the same. The eyes might change colors or shape, but the eyes would pretty much be the constant. But then their features would kind of fade out, and then another face would come in. And so at that age, I didn't totally realize it then. I was, 9, 10? But I was seeing past lives come in. And
spontaneously.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't know how to meditate. I didn't know what meditation was. I didn't know any of this. I was just channeling it. And
now, you had never told me that you had this ability with other people as well. And that wasn't just Mr. Pfister, is that right?
That's right. Yeah. No, I could look at people and see their face change. Sometimes it was depending on what they were thinking or feeling. Sometimes it would be from another lifetime that was coming in to show me who they had been. There was something going on in their lifetime right now that was accessing the information, experiences from that particular lifetime.
Right.
Didn't really know what was happening until a year or two later. I discovered, I don't know how I did it, but Edgar Cayce books. There is a river and all these. And I went from that into the Seth material and Ruth Montgomery and Life and Teachings of the Masters of the Far East. So here I am, 11, 12, 13, just devouring these books and getting such validation, because my entire lifetime up to that point, I had just been labeled a strange kid. And so it was incredibly liberating, really, to find out that other people did this, that it was a real thing, and it could be used to help people.
I have learned who Edgar Cayce is, but could you tell people, if they're not familiar with that name,
Sure.
who he was? He passed away now.
Yeah, sure. He was seen as America's sleeping clairvoyant. He was I believe, a photographer, just doing normal photographic things. And I believe he had an accident and hit his head, and then discovered that he had this ability when he would go into like a self-induced trance, kind of like he was sleeping. He suddenly had access to what Tesla talked about as this vast reservoir of knowledge in the universe, or the Akashic records, or whatever you want to call this core of knowing past, present, future. And
Okay.
people would contact him with like physical ailments or emotional things that were happening in their life that they couldn't understand. And he would go into this trance. He would have a person there that would transcribe what he would say, but he would come up with very specific solutions, like different chemicals and herbs and things like that could be combined to create something that would completely heal whatever the person's physical ailment was, or be able to explain to them a specific past life situation where they had maybe encountered the same person they're having an issue with in their current lifetime,
Right.
and help heal them. But
And very successfully, right?
very successfully. And there's phenomenal documentation about this. And there's even
Right.
the ARE, the Association of Research and Enlightenment, which was created around his teachings to help other people learn to develop these abilities and learn from what he shared in the volume of information.
And at the time when he was doing this, it was really not known. There was not much known about this. There was no publicity about it, right? I mean, he was one of the only sources of this type of information from the other side.
Right. And in our culture, this was something that, in our society, this just was not, as you said, really acknowledged or anything. Whereas in indigenous culture and tradition, this is very revered, being able to access information from other places and bring it into modern day.
Okay. But in the United States in the 1900s, the mid 1900s, nobody was doing this. No. And the same with the Ruth Montgomery and the Seth Chronicles. And that was another connection with the other side, right? And channeling.
Yeah.
And
the Ruth Montgomery in particular was really meaningful for me because she was a journalist. She was a reporter. And she, in her research, was discovering over and over again things that could not be explained just within what the paradigm was at that time.
Right.
And so that's when she began to devote her life to getting this information and sharing it.
When you first got access to these writings, I think you said you were 12. Now, you had been having these type of experiences for 8 years now, and at least, and repeatedly, without any explanation as to how could this be, and are there other people out there that are having these things? It wasn't like you could go on YouTube or the internet or whatever. There just wasn't. It wasn't a news story or a documentary there for you to see. So you were there at like a little island. You were having these experiences. That was part of you, absolutely part of you, but also was a human being trying desperately to be accepted into regular society, as we all do. And I just can't imagine how difficult that was for you.
I think the thing that saved my life was in 3rd grade. I was so lucky to be put into the special education program for gifted children in our school district. And so for 4 grades, 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th, I was in an incredibly creative environment where it was great. Nothing was linear. And so I was doing things like writing a parody of The Tempest and making the costumes, and the class would act it out. I mean, things that obviously from a past life working with Shakespeare, things along that line, but I could do things like that, taking field trips to the UN and totally, understanding different languages and different cultures and traditions, and just having access to things that I would not have had I been in a more typical, limited, linear school. I think I probably would have been labeled, I don't know what it would have been labeled, but I would have, it would have been pretty bleak because I would have consistently gotten a message, there's something wrong with you. This is not how we normally do this. So
that's right. Thank goodness for that program. There was one time when you got some attention that you didn't really want, and that's when you had some type of vision or something involving a Vietnam veteran with an LSD flashback. Could you talk about that a little bit, please?
Yeah. Oh, that, as you say that, I kind of like shrink back into, a tiny little shell. I believe I was like 12. And for a creative writing assignment, I wrote about a Vietnam vet having a bad LSD flashback. And I remember, it was handwritten, and I put it in like a little folder, and I cut out construction paper and waves to kind of show what his vision was as he was on this LSD trip, and had this all together and handed it into my teacher. Well, my aunt was a nurse, and she read this, and she told my parents that there was no way I could have written such an accurate account of an LSD flashback unless I myself had personally taken LSD.
Okay.
Which resulted in a trip to the pediatrician's office, and he was looking between my fingers and toes for needle marks. And he was like, that's not even like LSD. But it was like getting kind of squished down and being told it's not okay how you think. It's not okay how you process things. And this frightens us, and we need to figure out what's wrong with you.
Right.
Yeah. So that was tough. And even just things like writing a book report on like Treasure Island. I mean, what I did was I took pieces of oak tag, the heavier paper. I stained it with tea, and I wrote this thing out. And I was the kid from Treasure Island. I took on that persona, and I wrote about what had happened during, the story of Treasure Island, and then how I had decided to stay on the island and marry a native girl. And I had a family, and I was hoping that someone would find this note. And then I rolled it up and put it in an empty bottle and handed that in as my report.
Oh, so creative.
Yeah, but it's like pulling from like past life things and
right.
other frequencies. And the teacher,
that's not fair, Jonna Rae. You're cheating.
Exactly. So where does this stuff come to you?
And well, I lived it, so I could talk about it.
I was a sailor. I put many messages in bottles and threw them off the ship.
Oh,
yeah, trying to pass as normal was interesting.
One thing I just want to touch on too is that you were very close with your grandfather, and his name is Raymond. Is that right?
Right.
And that's where the Rae part of your name comes from, Jonna Rae?
Yeah.
Yeah. And at the time when he passed, you were very close with him, I think.
I was.
Your father?
He was a musician, as a matter of fact. And
okay.
That was something that we had in common on an energetic level.
Yes, you being a violinist, after all.
And a German opera singer.
And German opera singer. But at any rate, he passed away, and you were profoundly affected by that. And it's my understanding is that you wrote a poem, and could you tell us about that?
Sure. I was very, very close to Papa, who was a Renaissance man. He taught agriculture at Penn State, and he was a musician. He was a farmer, all these different things. And I was just fascinated with him. And when he died, I was heartbroken. I was only 14. And so I wrote this little poem because I was always doing creative writing things. And the poem, I just sat down and did it, didn't really think about it. And the beginning was, to die is but to board a ship bound for a holy port, where there is eternal peace and joy, no pain of any sort. All earthly worries melt away like ice at dawn of spring. The heart is freed eternally of every painful thing. And when at last God's port is reached, all suffering is past, you realize with reverent thanks that you've come home at last. So I was 14 when I wrote that, and I didn't read that.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, basically, it was a Viking funeral I was writing about.
Okay.
We were Vikings. I didn't know that.
Wow.
But it was like picking up on that frequency. And the minister read it at his funeral. And
beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful. So your connection then with another past life of Viking life.
Yep.
Again, as a young girl. Your life after your 12, 13, 14 years, you went on and went to college, I believe. And I think you mentioned that you got a scholarship.
I did. I wanted to be an anthropologist until I got a journalism scholarship to college. It's like, okay, fine, I'll write.
We'll go with that. Yeah. And where did you go to college?
I went to Rider College in Trenton, New Jersey. Right now it's Rider University. It has grown since then.
Neat.
That was my first time away from the very restrictive command under which I grew up. Dad had been a Marine Corps drill sergeant and marksman too.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so very
Say no more.
very strict. And in college, I could really explore all these things that were happening to me that I didn't really have a name for yet. And I would do things like hold seances in the dorms. And this is where the mobiles that everybody had in the 70s would be swinging back. And the tops would explode off of soda bottles. And I would transfigure it into an Indian and everybody would see it in the seance.
Let's go through that a little slower.
Okay.
All right. So you're in college, you're having a seance. Everybody's there minding their own business. They're like, okay, yeah, Jonna Rae's going to have a seance, quote unquote, so let's go see what that's all about. And what happened?
Well, the mobiles that everybody had hanging in their dorm rooms back in the 70s started to swing back and forth as the spirits showed up to participate in this. And
and did anyone have a reaction to that?
They were freaked out. They were totally freaked out. They were terrified of me. And
and what else?
The caps would explode off of soda bottles. They would all see me transfigure into an Indian. It wasn't just one person. And there were no drugs involved in this.
Now, what do you mean you would transfigure into an Indian?
Well, the same way that I could look at Mr. Pfister and see his features change.
Right.
I was very powerfully transfiguring and they could see it. Everybody saw it in the group, which kind of freaked them out. Something else that as they were beginning to realize I was kind of, different.
Right.
One of the women in the dorm lost a silver ring. And she said, well, can you find it? And I said, yeah. And so word got around the dorm pretty quickly. And so I took her outside and I was walking with her, huge campus, and going on these little pathways, and the crowd behind us is getting bigger and bigger as people are saying, yeah, she thinks she can find a ring. This is really crazy. And so after a couple minutes of just walking on these different pathways and all that, I just stop and bend down and reach into the grass and pick up her ring. And she looks at it and grabs it and screams. Everybody screams and they run back to the dorm.
Right.
So, but I know. And then another thing that was interesting, in January, we had the opportunity to do an independent study program.
Okay.
College.
This is January in college.
In college, yeah. And I thought, wouldn't it be cool to do an independent study on healing? And
healing.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so I had talked one of my professors into being my advisor for this. And so he and I would bring 6 students into his office and he would stand there with a stopwatch and it would be like a cheerleader with a pulled hamstring. And, I would start like with my hands above her head, working in her energy field, never actually physically touching anybody. And he would stand there with the stopwatch to see how long it would take for the person to feel fine. Bruises would disappear. Headaches would go away. The hamstring, just stopped hurting. It stopped aching as we were doing this. And so, at Rider College, there might still be a documented study of how long it takes to heal all these different things. So
through energy.
Yeah. Just totally working with the energy. And the reason I wanted to do this was I was also a teen reporter for the Allentown Morning Call newspaper. And I was assigned all the weird stories to cover, which I loved. And so they sent me to cover this psychics lecture. And she was talking, and then she stopped her lecture and came over to me and picked me out of the crowd and said I was going to be one of the leaders in raising world consciousness that was going to start in my 40s.
Okay. Let's go over that a little bit slower.
Okay.
The person who was giving what was it?
She was, there was a psychic in Allentown, Pennsylvania.
Okay. All right. So she's a psychic and you're in a crowd of people.
Yeah, I'm the little reporter sent to cover it for the team.
Oh, that's right. You're the reporter sent to cover this psychic speech or whatever session.
Yeah.
And she came to you and she said that you, Jonna Rae, had you met her before?
No, I had no idea who she was.
And she came over and stood by you.
Yeah, picked me out. She said, "You're a psychic, you're a healer, and you're also going to be helping to raise world consciousness. And that's going to start when you're in your 40s. Okay. And so here I am, this little 17-year-old kind of freaked out by all this. But that was why then when I was back in college, from the summer break where I had written this article, wanted to kind of test the healing thing and see what that was all about. And by golly, it worked.
Yeah, I have a person that's become my friend that I met through the podcast. Her name's Margie Florimbio, and she is a Reiki practitioner. And she also I've done some past life regressions with her that are very, very profound and strong. And she, like you, has an extraordinary connection to the other side and abilities that she's modest about, but are extraordinary. And you're very modest about these abilities, and they are extraordinary. I'm going to have to finish up for this episode, but the fact that at 17, this person, without ever meeting you before, a person who was connecting up with the other side, identified you and predicted what you're going to do. It is really significant. And I know for you, it was just another day, right?
Yeah, she was reading my energy field. And
right.
Yeah, and this is something everybody can do. And this is something that, we just need to normalize this.
Yeah. Well, the Practical Spirituality Institute is available to look at online, I take it. Mm-hmm. And I urge anybody who is interested to take a look at that and perhaps attend classes and develop abilities that you have, that you don't know you have, you might not think you have, but that you do have, taught by a person who is obviously incredibly gifted and spiritual and kind. And so I can't urge you enough to check out the Practical Spirituality Institute and to do further research into Jonna Rae Bartges, who is an incredible person. And I'm just so honored to have you on, Jonna Rae. And thank you so much for being here. I really look forward to our next time to do more in our series of interviews with you, because you have a lot to give us. And I do thank you for that.
Thank you so much, Jim. It's such an honor